She pulled up to a Navy base checkpoint in a beat-up sedan. Faded jacket, no makeup. Hair scraped back like she hadn't slept in 2 days. The guard looked at her insignia and laughed. "Take that off, ma'am." "You didn't earn that?" She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She just handed over her ID and watched the far perimeter like she already knew something was wrong. 30 seconds later, 3 armed men slipped through the fence line. And in the next 5 seconds, this woman, the guard, tried to humiliate, put all 3 of them on the ground. If you're new here, subscribe, hit that like button, and drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The checkpoint at Harbor Point Naval Station smelled like motor oil, burnt coffee, and the particular brand of boredom that settles into security posts after too many quiet shifts in a row. It was 14:22 on a Tuesday. The sky over the Chesapeake was the color of old pewter, not quite storm, not quite clear, the kind of afternoon that couldn't commit to anything. A maintenance crew was repainting lane markings 50 yards back from the gate, their orange vests bright against the gray asphalt. A food truck had parked along the visitor lot perimeter, engine idling, doing steady business with junior enlisted who had the afternoon off from whatever misery their command had lined up for them. Seagulls worked the trash cans near the outer fence. A pair of them were fighting over something unidentifiable near the barrier arm. Everything felt ordinary. Everything looked like exactly what it was, which was, as it turned out, the whole problem. Master-at-Arms First Class Ryan Mercer had been on gate duty since 600. 8 hours and change of checking IDs, logging visitors, waving through contractors, and explaining to people for the 14th time that yes, the visitor lot was to the left. No, you cannot park in the command lot without a base sticker. Yes. I understand you were here last month. Policy doesn't change based on frequency of visits. He was good at the job, or at least he had spent 6 years performing it well enough that nobody had questioned whether he was good at it, which amounts to the same thing in most institutions. He was broad-shouldered, mid-30s, clean-shaved with the precision of someone who viewed personal grooming as a professional statement. His uniform was immaculate. His posture was the kind that comes from attending a lot of leadership courses and internalizing their aesthetic, if not always their substance. He ran 3 miles every morning. He kept his weapon clean and his boots polished, and he liked the checkpoint because it was the boundary between what belonged here and what didn't, and he was the person who got to determine which was which. He was also the kind of man who made decisions about people in the first 3 seconds. He had never identified this as a liability. The sedan came through the outer approach at 14:22 and changed a Civic 8 or 9 years old. The kind of gray-green that happens when a vehicle spends too long in coastal air without anyone bothering with upkeep. Faded. A diagonal crack running through the right rear brake light. Current inspection sticker, but barely. It moved through the outer gate at exactly the posted approach speed, which was either compliance or the kind of deliberate correctness that comes from someone who didn't want to give a checkpoint guard a reason to flag them early. Mercer stepped to the driver's window as it slowed. One hand on the post. Weight forward. Voice ready. The window came down. The woman behind the wheel was small, 5'4" at the outside. Maybe 130 pounds. Early 30. White. Dark hair pulled into a knot, tight enough that it must have been uncomfortable, or she'd stopped noticing discomfort in her hair a long time ago. She wore a gray thermal shirt under a flight jacket olive drab, old enough to have earned a softness at the collar, the kind of worn-in quality that surplus store replicas never quite achieve because they haven't actually been anywhere. The shoulder seams were stressed. The cuffs were frayed at the left wrist. On the left breast, directly over her heart, sat a naval special warfare insignia. The Trident. Eagle, anchor, trident, flintlock, pistol. Mercer's eyes stopped moving. The Trident is not a decoration. It is not something you apply for or get handed at a graduation ceremony. with cake and family photographs. It is the physical record of a process that breaks the majority of candidates who attempt it bud bust, the basic underwater demolition, SEAL course, plus years of subsequent training, plus operational qualification. The men Mercer had seen wearing it, and they had always been men. In his experience, wore it with a particular quality of stillness he'd never quite been able to articulate. Not arrogance, not posturing, just a kind of settled quiet, like a machine that's been tested to its limits and come back calibrated. This woman did not, by Mercer's assessment, look like that. She looked tired. She looked like she'd driven a long way on not enough sleep. She looked, if he was being honest with the inside of his own head, like someone's older sister who'd found the jacket at a thrift store and thought the patches were decorative. Identification, he said. Not a question. She reached into the inside pocket. No hesitation, no searching. She knew exactly where it was and produced a military ID and a visitor authorization slip already clipped together. Mercer took them. Cross, Elena M. Commander. USN. He looked at the ID. He looked at her. He looked at the Trident again. What brings you to Harbor Point, Commander? Meeting with Admiral Hale. I'm on his schedule. Her voice was flat. Not rude, just stripped of the performance most people put into interactions with gate guards. The accommodation, the slight over-explanation, the instinct to fill silence with reassurances. She gave him none of that. She answered the question and stopped talking. Mercer turned the ID over in his hand. That jacket, he said. Where'd you get it? A pause. Short but specific. She turned to look at him directly for the first time, since the window had come down. Her eyes were gray or gray-green, hard to fix in the flat afternoon light. Still. Not the stillness of someone trying to appear calm, but the stillness of someone whose baseline didn't have much noise in it to begin with. It's mine, she said. That's a Trident insignia. I know what it is. Women don't serve in Devjiru. The air between them changed temperature. That statement, she said, hasn't been accurate for some time. No heat in it. Just correction, delivered the way you'd note a factual error in a report. Mercer's jaw moved. Petty Officer Daniels, in the guard booth 20 feet back, had stopped pretending to look at his screen. Lance, the new kid, 20 years old, still at the stage where he studied how Mercer handled things at the gate, was watching from near the barrier arm. Ma'am, I need you to step out of the vehicle. She didn't move immediately. She was looking at something beyond the windshield, through the gate, toward the interior of the base, the quest to stand. Her eyes tracked briefly to the right east, toward the vehicle maintenance lot, then came back. All right, she said. She got out. And this was the thing that Mercer would turn over in his mind for months afterward, trying to understand what he'd missed and why he'd missed it. She moved wrong. Not obviously wrong, not in a way he could have pointed to in the moment and named. But psychologically, professionally, but she planted her feet without thinking about it, oriented herself in space relative to the barriers and the vehicles and the gate structure without making a production of it, and held herself in a posture that was relaxed and fully without vulnerability. Had simultaneously, which is a combination that takes years to build and cannot be faked convincingly, because the human eye reads it even when. The conscious brain doesn't know what it's reading. He registered it as something mildly irritating he couldn't name. Didn't slow down. That insignia is a military decoration. Wearing one you didn't earn is a federal offense. I'm aware of the law. Then you understand why I'm asking you to remove it. She looked at him steadily. I'm not removing it. Ma'am, I need you to... My name is Commander Cross, she said. Same flat register, not louder. You have my identification. You can verify my authorization through the visitor management system. Right now, the login is on your terminal, or you can call Admiral Hale's office directly. The number is on the authorization slip. She paused, and when she continued, her voice had shifted, barely, the way a signal changes when it locks onto something. Before you do either of those things, I need you to look at the east perimeter fence. Section near the vehicle maintenance lot. Don't move your head fast. Just look. Mercer blinked. Ma'am, there are two men in dark civilian clothing moving along the fence line. They've been pacing the same 50-meter section for about 4 minutes. One of them has been checking sightlines toward the VIP holding area twice in the last 90 seconds. Her voice was still controlled, still quiet. I haven't located a third. There will be a third. Mercer stared at her. Lance had taken 2 steps toward them without realizing it. I don't know what you think you're. The siren hit without a warning sound, without build-up, just there, full volume, splitting the afternoon completely in half. Every radio on the checkpoint crashed simultaneously. Gate 2 vehicle incursion, south secondary entrance. Repeat, vehicle incursion, south secondary. All units respond. Mercer's training activated the way it was supposed to fast, organized the ingrained sequence of responses to an active threat event, overriding everything that wasn't the immediate task. He keyed his radio, ordered Daniels to lock the primary barrier, directed Lance to the guard shack, began running through the protocol that 8 years of preparedness had laid down like tracks in his muscle memory. He did exactly what he was supposed to do. He just did it while looking the wrong direction. Through the gaps between vehicles and barriers and the food truck now streaming panicked civilians, a military-style truck had punched through the chain link at the south secondary entrance. From 200 meters, it was more shaped than vehicle heavy, fast, dragging a tail of shredded fencing material that threw sparks off the road surface and screamed against the concrete dividers. Every head turned, every radio lit up with traffic. QRF, this is Ops. We need immediate response to the south entrance. Stop that vehicle. All units stop that vehicle. Southgate is compromised. Southgate is down. The noise was total. It had a texture to it, a density that narrowed the world to a single point of focus. There was the truck. There was the threat. Everything else was background. This is what tunnel vision actually feels like. From the inside, not blindness, but absolute certainty that the thing you're looking at is the thing that matters. Elena did not turn toward the truck. She stood at her sedan's door and watched the east perimeter fence. Her breathing was the same as it had been during the conversation about her jacket. Mercer grabbed her arm. Get in your vehicle, ma'am. Lock the doors and stay down. She removed his hand from her arm. Not hard, not dramatic. The way you'd move something that had ended up somewhere inconvenient. The truck has no driver, she said. What? Look at the cab. Windshield reflection. The seat is empty. It's remote operated, probably a commercial platform with an RC modification, could be as basic as a modified agricultural rig. It's running a preset path. She wasn't looking at him. She was still watching east. It's a decoy. The real approach is already inside your perimeter. Mercer looked at the truck. It was still 200 meters out, angled now against the interior service road curbing. One wheel folded sideways. The cab window caught the light at an angle that empty seat. The seat was empty. The entire architecture of the last 30 seconds rearranged itself in his head with the particular nausea of a picture that is snapped into correct focus and revealed something you didn't want to see. He turned back to Elena. She was already gone. She moved along the line of stopped vehicles at the gate efficient, low, using the column of backed-up cars as cover the way. Water uses the path of least resistance. Not running. Just moving at a pace that covered ground faster than it looked like it should. Her weapon was out, a compact Glock, from the small of back holster under the flight jacket. Low ready, both hands. She moved with it, like it was part of the hand rather than something attached to it. She's armed, Mercer started. But the response system was in full flood now. Daniels on the radio. Lance behind the barrier. Every unit on the base reorienting toward the south, and Mercer was standing at a checkpoint that had already seeded the moment. Elena moved east. She'd been tracking the first attacker for the 11 seconds she'd been out of her vehicle. He was at the edge of her sight picture, a man in dark civilian clothing emerging from The gap between a parked LMTV and the perimeter fence near the maintenance lot. Late 30s, physical, moving with the controlled urgency of someone executing a pre-planned route in under time pressure. Suppressed pistol in his right hand. His eyes were on the black Suburban in the VIP holding area. Admiral Hale's vehicle. She calculated the angle and moved. The forklift near the lot entrance gave her cover from where she'd assessed the second attacker's likely position. She stayed behind it until the last 3 meters, then cut left, below the first attacker's peripheral vision, inside the radius where his weapon training wanted her to be standing. He heard her at the last moment, started to pivot. She caught his weapon wrist with both hands, left controlling the muzzle direction, right driving the elbow joint past its designed range of motion. The physics were simple. The timing was everything. She rotated hard, stripping the weapon as his grip failed in the same motion, and redirected his own momentum into the concrete base of a light pole. His face met it at a speed that ended the engagement. He dropped and stayed down. She didn't pause to look at him. The second attacker appeared from behind the LMTV, bigger than the first, moving fast and trying to close distance, trying to close distance before she could reacquire a sight picture. Smart approach. Reduce her reaction time. Get inside her weapon's effective use range. Use the size differential. She'd seen him coming for 4 seconds. She pivoted back toward her, positioned herself, without consciously deciding to, in order to keep it available, and caught the open car door with her free hand. She swung it outward on its hinges. At the precise moment, his legs entered the swing radius. Metal hit his thighs with a crack that sounded expensive. His forward momentum kept going while his lower body stopped, and he went sideways, one knee hitting pavement, balance gone. She was already moving around the door. Her elbow found the back of his neck-controlled force, specifically calibrated, enough to drop him, not enough to do permanent damage, because she needed to talk to these people later. He went down. She stepped over him. The third attacker was 19 meters away. He had stopped moving. This was the tell he should have committed to the plan while the window was still open, pushed through while she was engaged with the second man. Instead, he'd watched 2 people go down in approximately 4 seconds, and his nervous system was doing what nervous systems do when confronted with information that fundamentally contradicts the scenario they'd been trained for. He froze. 1 second. That was all she needed. She covered the distance at a run that didn't look dramatic. She came from his left side, below his weapon arm, and the sequence that followed happened in 3 movements that Mercer, now sprinting toward the scene. 20 meters back, weapon raised, could not fully track. The attacker's weapon arm went one direction. His body went another. He was on the ground. The whole thing had taken 4 seconds and something. Silence settled over that particular piece of ground the way it does after something violent, not absence of sound. Because the sirens were still going, and radios were still broadcasting, and somewhere in the south the truck was still grinding against something metallic. But a specific local quiet that forms around a situation that has concluded. Elena stood. She scanned. She keyed the radio on her jacket. "This is Commander Cross. I have 3 down, northeast of the VIP holding area. Requesting medical and backup to my position. Also recommend immediate EOD response to the south entrance vehicle, and a full sweep of the east perimeter fence from Delta to Golf." This was a 2-vector approach. South was the distraction. A beat of static. Copy, identify yourself again? Cross. Commander Elena Cross. Tell Admiral Hale his 4:30 is going to be pushed. She looked at the nearest downed attacker. Tell him we should talk about who knew his schedule. She holstered her weapon and crouched over the first man, pulling a pair of nitrile gloves from her jacket pocket and beginning a systematic search of his clothing with the efficiency of someone for whom this was a familiar procedure rather than an improvisation. Mercer reached her 35 seconds later. He had stopped running about 10 meters out because his body understood, even before his brain caught up, that running into this scene with a raised weapon was not the appropriate response to what was in front of him. He walked the last stretch. He safed his pistol because she'd been right about triggered discipline. He stood at the edge of what had happened and looked at it. 3 men, all living, all neutralized. The light pole, the car door, still hanging open at its full extension. The clean geometry of it, how she'd used the lot, the vehicles, the distances, all of it as deliberate as a diagram. "You should clear that weapon all the way," Elena said without looking up. "Strong side holster. You've been at ready too long." He holstered it. He didn't have anything else to do with his hands. "How did you?" He stopped, restarted. "When did you know?" "I had a reasonable suspicion at the outer gate. Your checkpoint had a clean blind spot on the east side, nothing blocking sightlines from the maintenance lot to the VIP area, except the LMTV, which was parked incorrectly for the available space, which suggested it had been moved. And the 2 men I flagged had been pacing the fence line for 4 minutes in a pattern that wasn't consistent with any legitimate maintenance activity scheduled for today." She glanced up briefly. "I checked the board when I came through the outer gate. It's posted publicly." Mercer stared at her. She looked at the man she was searching. No wallet, no ID, no phone. The skin on his right forearm had a distinctive scar pattern, a cluster of small marks at a specific spacing that Elena recognized and said nothing about in present company. The Admiral's vehicle door opened. Rear Admiral Thomas Hale stepped out. He was in his late 50s, silver-haired, the kind of trim that came from decades of physical standards rather than vanity. He moved with the economy of someone who had long ago stopped making any motion that didn't serve a purpose. He looked at the 3 men on the ground. He looked at Elena. He looked at Mercer. His expression did not change, which was itself an expression. "Commander Cross," he said. "Admiral." She stood, stripped the gloves. "I'd delay any further vehicle movement until EOD clears the truck. And I'd recommend treating this as potentially ongoing 3-man teams at this level. Usually have overwatch." Agreed. Hale reached for his radio, then paused. He looked at Mercer fully. This officer was at the checkpoint? A long pause. Elena looked at Mercer. Mercer looked at the Trident on her jacket. He thought about what he'd said to her 7 minutes ago. "There were some procedural complications at the gate," Elena said carefully. "I see." Hale's voice was measured in the way that very senior officers get measured when they are in fact furious and have had decades of practice not showing it immediately. "We'll debrief fully." He looked at Mercer. "Get a written statement done. Full account. Everything that happened from the time this vehicle approached the checkpoint. Every decision, every action, every word." He let that sit. "Leave nothing out." Mercer opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked one more time at the insignia, at the Trident, on the faded olive jacket of the woman he'd tried to detain for stolen valor while she'd been identifying an active threat against an admiral's life. He had nothing. Behind them, response teams were converging on the south entrance around a driverless truck that had done its job, perfectly drawn, every eye, every radio call, every defensive asset on the base, while 3 men came through the east fence and nearly reached their target. Nearly. Mercer keyed his radio. "Gate 1, this is Ops. Status on VIP package is Admiral Hale Sickus." He looked at Hale. He looked at Elena, who was now speaking quietly to the first responders arriving at the scene, directing them with the calm authority of someone who didn't need a title to be listened to. He keyed the radio. "Gate 1 to Ops," he said. His voice was rough at the edges. "Admiral is secure." A pause. "We had some intervention." He didn't explain further. He wasn't sure he had the right words yet. 40 meters away, in the shadow of the maintenance bay, a 4th man stood very still and watched the aftermath take shape. He had not been part of the assault team. His role was different: observation, evaluation, reporting. He had been in position for 2 hours, watching the base layout, the shift patterns, the checkpoint procedures. He had seen the sedan come through the outer gate. He had seen the exchange at the window. He had written Elena Cross off as a complication that the team would work around. Now he watched her direct first responders with quiet precision. He watched Mercer stand to one side, saying nothing, looking smaller than he had an hour ago. He watched Admiral Hale treat her with the deference of someone who genuinely meant it. The man in the maintenance bay reached into his jacket. He typed a message on a phone with no registered number, using an encrypted application, to a contact listed only by a 2-digit code. He read the message back once, sent it. Then he walked out through the bay's service exit, across the secondary lot, into the parking structure, and he was gone before the first responders had finished securing the scene. The message was 8 words. Cross was here. She made the 3. Bort. Back at the checkpoint, the day was beginning its slow administrative collapse into paperwork and incident reports, and the particular exhaustion that follows an adrenaline event once the body realizes the emergency is over and sends the bill. Mercer stood where Hale had left him. He was still looking at the east fence, at the gap in the perimeter where the 3 men had come through, at the clear sightline from that gap to the VIP holding area that he walked past every single day and had never flagged because it had never occurred to him to look at his own base the way someone planning an attack would look at it. Elena had looked at it from a car window, waiting for him to stop questioning her jacket. He stood there with that thought for a long moment. Then he got out his notebook, and he started writing. The notebook filled up faster than Mercer expected. Not because he had a lot to say, because every time he wrote a sentence down and read it back, he had to sit with what it actually meant. Subject approached checkpoint at 14:22. Subject presented valid military ID and visitor authorization. Subject was asked to remove insignia. He wrote it in the clipped, passive voice of incident reports, the kind of language designed to describe events without implicating judgment, and it didn't work. The judgment was in every line, whether he named it or not. He was still writing when the base went into modified lockdown. The response teams had cleared the truck by 15:10, no secondary devices, no passengers, a commercial agricultural platform with a bolted-on remote control unit that a halfway competent mechanic could have built in a weekend. The east fence breach was secured. The 3 attackers were in medical hold under armed guard, all 3 conscious, none of them talking. EOD had swept the VIP lot and the surrounding structures and found nothing additional. The base was intact. The Admiral was alive, and the woman responsible for both of those facts was currently sitting in a folding chair outside the base operations building, drinking bad coffee from a paper cup, filling out her own paperwork with the methodical patience of someone who had done this particular kind of administrative aftermath enough times to stop resenting it. Mercer watched her from across the lot. He didn't mean to. He'd told himself he was waiting for the duty officer to call him in for the formal debrief, which was true, and that he happened to be facing that direction, which was less true. He was watching her the way you watch something you've fundamentally misjudged, trying to understand where your calibration went wrong. She didn't look up from her paperwork. He wasn't sure if she knew he was watching. He suspected she did. The debrief room was a standard institutional space, drops ceilings, fluorescent lights, a rectangular table with 8 chairs and a whiteboard that hadn't been fully erased from the previous meeting. Someone had left a half-eaten energy bar on the table's edge. It smelled like dry erase markers and carpet that had absorbed decades of stress. Captain Judith Vance ran the debrief. She was in her mid-50s, the base's security director, the kind of compact, precise authority that had nothing to prove because it had already proved itself somewhere else a long time ago. She had the case files on a tablet and a legal pad in front of her, and she looked at Mercer's at the way someone looks at a broken thing they're trying to decide whether to repair or replace. Mercer sat at one end of the table. Elena sat at the other. Commander Reeves Hale's senior aide was present, but not speaking, positioned at the wall with a tablet. A woman Mercer didn't recognize sat beside Vance. No nameplate, no introduction. She had a separate recorder running, which nobody mentioned. "Let's establish the sequence," Vance said. She looked at Mercer. "Walk me through the contact from initial approach." Mercer walked through it. He used the same language from his written statement, flat, sequential, as accurate as he could make it. He described the vehicle, the identification, the insignia, his concerns about the insignia. He described asking her to exit the vehicle. He described the exchange that followed. He did not editorialize. He didn't need to. Vance listened without interrupting. When he finished, she made a note on her legal pad and said, "At what point did you become aware of the potential threat on the east perimeter?" "When Commander Cross identified it verbally." "And your response to that identification?" Mercer looked at the table. "I told her to get back in her vehicle." Vance wrote something down. "Commander Cross," she said, shifting without inflection. "Can you describe what you observed on approach?" Elena set her pen down. The LMTV in the maintenance lot was parked at an angle that didn't match the available space. It was tighter than it needed to be, which suggested it had been moved to a specific position rather than parked by someone just putting it away. The two men I identified were moving in a repeated east-west pattern along the fence, which isn't consistent with any task that requires that movement. They were checking the VIP holding area sightline on a roughly 45-second cycle. She paused. The food truck was also positioned incorrectly for the prevailing wind. The exhaust output was blowing into the eating area, which a vendor with any experience wouldn't do. I assessed it as a possible secondary position, but couldn't confirm before the incursion started. Vance looked at her for a moment. "You observed all of that from a vehicle window during a checkpoint stop." "I was there for approximately 4.5 minutes. Vance made another note. The woman with the unnamed recorder leaned forward slightly and said, "Commander Cross, what initially drew your attention to the perimeter on approach?" Elena considered the question. "I noticed the base security camera coverage had a gap in the east section. The camera near the maintenance lot was angled about 15 degrees off its optimal coverage zone. Small adjustment might have been wind, might have been intentional. I started looking at what that gap covered, and the LMTV was the first thing that stood out." Silence in the room. Mercer was looking at the table. "One more thing," Elena said. "The truck that came through the south gate, whoever planned this knew the response protocol for a vehicle incursion at that entrance. The timing, the direction, the noise signature, it was engineered to pull maximum assets toward the south, while creating a coverage window on the east. That's not improvised. That's someone who has studied this base's response patterns." She looked at Vance, which means either they had a lot of time for reconnaissance or they had help. The room went very quiet. Vance's pen stopped. Commander Reeves, at the wall, looked up from his tablet for the first time. "It's a significant allegation," Vance said. "It's an observation," Elena said. "What you do with it is your call." The debrief ran for 2 hours and 40 minutes. By the time Mercer walked out of it, the afternoon had given up entirely and settled into early evening. The sky over the Chesapeake gone dark blue at the edges, with a cold front moving in off the water. He stood outside the operations building and breathed the salt air and tried to organize what was in his head into something that had a shape. It didn't quite get there. He was still standing there when Elena came out behind him. She had her flight jacket zipped now against the wind, her paperwork squared away, her coffee cup gone. She looked at him briefly, assessed something, and started walking toward the visitor lot. "Commander." She stopped. He hadn't planned the word. It just came out. She turned around. Mercer had never been good at the particular kind of conversation that required setting down something you'd been carrying. He was good at direct communication in operational contexts, good at clear instruction, good at kind of leadership that moved in a straight line from problem to solution. This was different. "I owe you an apology," he said. Elena looked at him. I made a judgment call at the checkpoint, he continued. Based on how you looked. What I expected. He stopped. Started again. It was wrong. What I said to you. The way I handled it. A long pause. The wind came off the water and moved through the overhead lights. Do you know why you made that judgment? Elena asked. Mercer considered giving her the easy answer. Habit. Protocol concern. The Stolen Valor Act gave him grounds. He had about 4 different framings available that would have softened it, and all of them would have been true in a narrow, technical sense. I looked at you, and I decided what you were, he said. Before I had any information. I decided, and then I looked for things that confirmed it. Elena studied him for a moment. Not warmly, not coldly. The way you look at something you're trying to take an accurate measurement of. That's more honest than most people get in 2 hours in a debrief room, she said. She turned to keep walking. Can I ask you something? Mercer said. She stopped again. Didn't turn around this time. Waited. When I was going at you about the jacket, you already knew something was wrong on the perimeter. You were already working the problem. He hesitated. Why didn't you just tell me? Just lead with that? You could have. I did tell you, she said. I mean earlier, when you first. I told you at the window. She turned partway, enough to speak over her shoulder. I told you to look at the east fence. I told you there were 2 men pacing the perimeter. You told me to get back in my vehicle. Mercer went quiet. He remembered it. He remembered her saying it. He remembered what he'd been thinking when she said it, that she was trying to distract him, deflect from the insignia issue, that it was the move of someone caught doing something they shouldn't be doing and looking for an escape route. He started. You didn't listen, she said. Not unkind, just exact. Because you'd already decided what I was. So everything I said filtered through that. She paused. It happens. It's a vulnerability in how people process information. The problem is when it happens at a security checkpoint. She walked away. He stood there and let her go, because there wasn't a response to that, and because she was right, and because the only thing worse than being wrong would be arguing about it. Captain Vance found him 20 minutes later near the gate, still working through his notes. Mercer, Captain. She stood beside him and looked out at the gate at the checkpoint where the whole thing had started, the barrier arm in lockdown position, the guard booth lit yellow against the dark. How long have you been on gate duty? 6 years, ma'am. Mostly. You have a good record, she said. I want to be clear about that. This isn't the sum of what you've done here, but it's the part that matters today. Vance was quiet for a moment. You know what the report is going to say. Yes, ma'am. The security failure at the checkpoint, the delay in acting on Commander Cross's identification of the perimeter threat that goes into the incident review. It goes into the after action. It becomes part of how we analyze what happened today. She paused. That means it becomes part of the record. Mercer nodded. Understood. What I'm less interested in is the record, Vance said. What I'm more interested in is what you do with it. He looked at her. We're going to have a lot of conversations over the next few weeks about what happened. Today, she said. About the fence coverage, about the camera gap, about response protocols, about how a 3-man team almost reached the Admiral inside a secured naval installation because everyone was looking at a truck. She looked at him. And about what happens at the front door when someone brings us information we're not prepared to receive. Mercer looked back at the gate. The crack in the brake light. The faded jacket. The way she'd handed over her ID and authorization together, already clipped, without being asked. He'd seen all of it and built a story out of it that had nothing to do with reality. Captain, he said, what's her actual background? Cross. What's in her file? Vance looked at him for a moment. Above your current clearance level, she said. But I'll tell you this, the Admiral requested her specifically. Through channels that don't normally get used for base security consultations. She paused. She wasn't scheduled for a meeting, Mercer. She was already here to do a job. Mercer stared at the checkpoint. Then the timing. Wasn't a coincidence, Vance said, which is its own conversation, and not one I'm having in a parking lot. She zipped her jacket. Get some rest. You're in for a long few days. She walked away. Mercer stood at the gate for another 10 minutes. The wind had picked up, coming in hard from the water now, the kind of cold that gets into the joints. He wasn't dressed for it, but he didn't move. He was thinking about the message Elena had relayed from the debrief room, the suggestion that someone familiar with the base's response protocols had helped engineer the attack. Thinking about the camera gap that was 15 degrees off its optimal coverage zone, which might have been wind and might not have been. Thinking about an LMTV parked at an angle that didn't match the available space. Someone had been inside this base. Not today. Before today. Someone had walked these roads and noted the camera angles and studied the shift patterns and worked out exactly how to make an entire security apparatus look in the wrong direction for long enough. And whoever had sent the four-man team, because there had been a fourth man, the one who hadn't engaged, the one Elena had mentioned in the debrief, with the specific measured caution of someone who'd seen him but couldn't prove it yet, whoever had sent them, had also sent someone to observe the outcome. Mercer thought about the maintenance bay, the service exit that opened onto the parking structure. He pulled out his radio. Daniels. Sergeant. The maintenance bay off the east lot. Alpha 7. Who cleared that during the sweep? A pause. It's on the secretary list, Sergeant. Should have been cleared by a longer pause, the sound of someone cross-referencing Kowalski's team. You want me to confirm? Yeah, Mercer said. And pull the parking structure camera footage. Everything from 14:0 forward. Full resolution. That's Sergeant? That's going to take a while to pull. The system's... I know, Mercer said. Pull it anyway. He clicked off the radio. The gate sat empty in the wind, barrier arm down, lights humming. Somewhere deeper in the base, Admiral Hale was in a room with people whose clearances dwarfed everyone else's on the installation, having conversations about what had happened today and what it meant that it had nearly happened. Somewhere in symmetrical hold, 3 men were declining to speak to anyone. And somewhere in Takar, on a road, distance increasing with every minute, a 4th man was reporting back to whoever had planned this. Mercer looked at the camera above the gate, the one pointed directly at the checkpoint where he had spent 4 minutes arguing with a naval special warfare operator about a jacket while she identified an active threat. He thought about what that footage looked like. He thought about who would watch it. He picked up his notebook and went back inside. Elena Cross sat alone in the small office Captain Vance had lent her, door closed, the overhead light off, working by the light of a laptop screen. The room was spare for desk, tow chairs, a filing cabinet, a window that looked out at the parking structure. Someone had left a dead plant on the filing cabinet, dried to a gray skeleton in its pot. The kind of plant that had been forgotten rather than killed. She had 3 windows open on the laptop. One was the incident report she was completing for her own command, a different command than anyone on this base was cleared to know about, at a different level than the base security office operated at, with a different set of people waiting for it. One was a personnel roster for Harbor Point Naval Station, cross-referenced against a separate document she'd brought with her on a secured drive. The third window was a photograph. A parking structure. Security camera footage, time-stamped 14:51. The image quality was typical base camera quality serviceable. Not great. But it was good enough to show a figure in a dark jacket moving through the B level of the structure toward the exit ramp. Back to the camera. Face not visible. But the jacket had a specific pattern of wear at the right shoulder seam that Elena had seen before on a different camera in a different country 18 months ago. She looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she opened a 4th window and typed a message to a contact listed only as a string of letters and numbers. It was short. She encrypted it with the application she'd been using for 3 years. She read it once. Sent it. She closed the laptop. In the dark, she sat with the dead plant and the hum of the ventilation system and the distant sound of the settling back into its routines, and she thought about what Vance had not said in the debrief room, the specific thing she'd looked at, but not written down, the observation she'd started toward and then pulled back from. The camera gap had been intentional. Elena was certain of it. And whoever had adjusted that camera had done it recently, within the last 72 hours, because she'd reviewed the base security assessment from 2 weeks ago, and the coverage zone had been correct then. Someone had been on this base within the last 3 days. Someone with access. Someone who had known that Admiral Hale would be in that VIP lot at that time on that day. Elena stood and went to the window. The parking structure sat dark and ordinary in the evening. The B-level exit ramp was empty. Cars sat in their slots under the dull orange of the overhead lights, untroubled, irrelevant. She pressed 2 fingers against the cold glass, thought about the 8-word message she imagined had been sent after the operation collapsed, thought about what happened to operations after they failed. They didn't stop. They regrouped. They tried again. She pulled her phone and called a number from memory. It rang twice. "I need a full background pull on 7 names," she said when the line connected. "Harbor Point Station personnel. Access levels Alpha through Delta. Cross-reference against any travel logs from the last 90 days. She paused. "And I need to know if there's been any unscheduled access to the base security camera management system in the last week." The voice on the other end said something. "I know what time it is," Elena said. "Pull the records." She hung up. She stood at the window for another moment. Then she picked up her jacket, checked her weapon by feel without looking at it, and left the office to find Captain Vance. Because whoever had been inside this base hadn't left behind nothing. Nobody ever left behind nothing. And Elena Cross had been finding things, people left behind in places they thought were clean for long enough to know that the next 48 hours were either going to break this open or give whoever was running this operation time to disappear. Into the architecture of the thing to become a name on a roster, a face on a badge, a voice that said good morning in a corridor and was never the person you were looking for until it was too late. She walked down the hallway. The dead plant stayed behind on the cabinet. The laptop sat dark on the desk. And somewhere in the parking structure footage, a figure in a worn jacket walked toward an exit ramp with its back to the camera still there, still visible, still findable, if you knew what you were looking at. Elena knew. She had known since the second she saw the shoulder seam. The question was what to do with knowing, and how fast, and who to tell, and who not to. These were not simple calculations. They never were. Captain Vance was not in her office. Elena found her in the operations center, a larger room 2 corridors down, banks of monitors along one wall, duty personnel at 3 workstations, the ambient noise of a facility running at elevated alert status. Vance stood at the central display with Commander Reeves, and a man Elena didn't recognize in civilian clothes, all 3 of them looking at a map overlay of the base perimeter with red markers indicating the breach points and response positions from the afternoon. Vance looked up when Elena came in. "Commander Cross, I was about to send someone for you. I need access to your camera management system logs," Elena said. "Specifically, any administrative access entries from the last 72 hours. And I need the personnel list for anyone with authorized access to that system." Vance looked at her for a moment. Then she looked at the man in civilian clothes. He was medium height, late 40s, with the particular unremarkability of someone who had spent a career being difficult to describe afterward. Gray jacket, no tie. The kind of stillness that Elena recognized because she'd worked around it before in rooms she wasn't supposed to talk about. "Commander Cross," Vance said. "This is Mr. Farron. He's been on base since this morning." Farron looked at Elena the way you look at a variable you've been tracking. "Commander," he said. "You're not base personnel," Elena said. "No. Which agency? A pause that answered the question without answering it. Elena looked at Vance. He was here before the incident. Yes. Then he needs to be in a different conversation than this one. She looked at Farron. No offense. Some taken, Farron said mildly. But I'll survive. He picked up a folder from the workstation beside him. I'll give you the room, Captain. Commander. He nodded once to each of them and walked out. Reeves watched him go. Vance waited until the door closed. He's on our side. Everyone says that about the people on their side, Elena said. Can I see the camera logs? The logs took 12 minutes to pull. Elena sat at a workstation with a duty petty officer named Garza, walking her through the system architecture, which cameras, which management interface, which login credentials had access to the composition settings. Garza was 24 and thorough, with the focused helpfulness of someone who understood that the question being asked was important without fully understanding why. This entry, Elena said. She put her finger on the screen. 1,400 hours, 2 days ago. Camera Delta 7, that's the maintenance lot camera? Yes, ma'am. Who logged this access? Garza leaned in. Read the credential string. Type something. That's huh. He typed again. That credential belongs Chief Petty Officer Warren, Maintenance System Supervisor. But he's been on emergency leave since last Thursday. He looked up. Family situation. He's not on base. Elena looked at the log entry. Someone had used Warren's credentials 2 days ago to adjust the camera covering the exact section of fence that the assault team had breached this afternoon. Who has access to his login information? Technically just him and the system administrator and IT security. Get me the system administrator, Elena said. Tonight. Garza looked at Vance. Vance nodded. The system administrator was a lieutenant junior grade named Park, 27 years old, reached by phone at his off-base apartment at 1940 and on base by 2015, still in civilian clothes with his jacket half-zipped and his hair not quite fixed from wherever he'd been pulled from. He sat across from Elena in the operations center, with the specific alert a look like he wasn't officer, trying very hard to look like he wasn't rattled by being called in after an active security incident on his installation. Elena put the log entry in front of him. This access. Warren's credentials. Did you authorize this? Park looked at the entry. No. I know. I haven't touched Delta 7 settings in at least 3 weeks. Who else could have generated a login under Warren's credentials? Nobody should be able to. The credentials are individually encrypted, and if Warren's on leave, his access should have been temporarily suspended by HR protocol. He looked at the timestamp again. This shouldn't exist, but it does. Yeah. He rubbed the back of his neck. Yeah, it does. Does the system log physical access to the camera management terminal? It logs remote access. Physical access to the terminal itself, the room it's in, has a keycard reader. I need the keycard log for that room, Elena said. Same window. 72 hours. Park was already pulling it up on his own laptop. Elena watched the screen. The keycard log for the camera management room showed 6 entries over the last 72 hours. 4 were during normal business hours, consistent with routine maintenance scheduling. 1 was at 3:20 the previous morning, which correlated with the duty watch change standard. The 6th entry was at 13:47 2 days ago, 47 minutes before Warren's login had been used to adjust the camera. Elena looked at the badge ID number attached to that entry. Whose badge is that? Park typed, read, typed again. He stopped. Elena watched his face change. That's mine, he said. Silence in the operations center. I wasn't here at 13:47 2 days ago, Parks said immediately. His voice had gone slightly higher. I was in a meeting. The quarterly IT security review. There are 12 people who can verify that. I know, Elena said. Because if you'd done this yourself, you wouldn't still be sitting here. Someone cloned your badge. Park stared at her. Vance, standing behind Elena, put her hand on the desk and leaned her weight on it. How do you clone a key card on this system? Park asked. You need about 45 seconds of physical proximity to the card and a reader that most people can build from parts that cost less than a good dinner, Elena said. When's the last time you used your card in a crowded area? Parking structure, food court, anywhere with press of people? Park opened his mouth, closed it. There was a vendor presentation, he said slowly. 3 weeks ago. External contractors, doing a pitch for an equipment upgrade. Conference room B, maybe 40 people. He paused. They had name tags, with mag stripe readers, for check-in. Elena looked at Vance. Vance looked at Reeves. Get me the vendor company name, Elena said to Park. And the attendee list from that presentation. Park was already typing. The vendor company was called Meridian Systems Integration. Elena typed the name into her secured laptop and got 3 results in the relevant databases, and none of them were the same company. 2 were legitimate IT infrastructure firms with verifiable histories. The third was a shell incorporated 14 months ago, registered agent address, that resolved to a mail forwarding service in Northern Virginia, no employees on record, 1 contract in its history. The contract was with Harbor Point Naval Station. The equipment upgrade presentation. She sat back. Reeves, reading over her shoulder, said, How do we not have a flag on this? A vendor with no history gets a contract on a naval installation, and nobody. The contract amount was under the threshold that triggers enhanced vetting, Elena said. $58,000. Threshold is 60. She paused. That's not an accident. The room went quiet in a specific way, the quiet of people absorbing something and not yet knowing what to do with it. Vance said, This was planned a long time ago. At least 14 months, Elena said. Probably longer. You don't build a shell company for a single operation. You build it because you expect to need it more than once. She looked at the clock on the wall, 20, 52. She looked at the parking structure photo on her laptop, the figure with the worn shoulder seam, walking toward the exit ramp. She needed a name. She needed it faster than the process was going to give her one. The call came in at 21:15. Elena's phone. The contact she'd messaged from Vance's borrowed office 2 hours ago. She stepped out of the operations center into the corridor and took it. Talk to me, she said. The voice on the other end was male, unhurried, with the faint accent of someone who had learned English as a second language well enough that you could no longer identify the first one. The 7 names you sent. 2 are clean. 2 have minor irregularities not connected to current events. 1 has a significant travel anomaly. 3 trips in the last 6 months under a recreational cover that doesn't hold up on examination. 1 is deceased, which you probably already knew, and 1 a pause. 1 is interesting. Define interesting. His background check has a gap. 14 months. Standard personnel records show continuous assignment, but the supporting documentation, leave records, training logs, fitness reports, they exist, but they're too clean. No corrections, no inconsistencies, no signatures that don't match. Real records have friction. These don't. Name: Senior Chief Petty Officer David Calloway. Base Security Division. Current assignment: Perimeter Integrity Oversight. Elena's hand tightened around the phone. Perimeter Integrity Oversight. The man responsible for ensuring the camera coverage was correct. The man who would have routine access to every section of fence on the base, every gate, every monitoring gap, without anyone finding it unusual. Physical description, she said. The voice gave it to her. She thought about the figure in the parking structure footage. Dark jacket, medium height, specific wear pattern at the right shoulder seam. Where is he now? She asked. That's the problem. His keycard last registered at 1,423 today, right before the incident started. He hasn't badged back in. Elena looked at the wall. 1,423 1 minute after the checkpoint siren had gone off. 1 minute after the truck had come through the south gate and every radio on the base had lit up. While everyone was looking south, David Calloway had badged out and walked off the installation. "Send me everything you have," she said. Photo included. She hung up and went back into the operations center. She put the photo on the central display. Calloway's official base ID photograph, standard issue, taken against a gray backdrop, the kind of image designed to be functional rather than revealing. Medium height, late 40s, unremarkable in the specific way of someone who had worked very hard at being unremarkable. Dark jacket in the image. Elena pulled up the parking structure footage beside it. The room looked at both images. Mercer, who had been called back in for the secondary debrief and was sitting at the wall looking like a man doing sustained penance, leaned forward. "That's Calloway," he said. Everyone looked at him. "I know him. He does the weekly perimeter walk. Every Tuesday morning, 700. Mercer's voice had changed. It was slower now, processing. He would have known the camera gap. He created it. He's the one who would have caught it in a normal audit. "When's the last time you physically saw him today?" Elena asked. Mercer thought. "This morning. 730, maybe, near the east fence." He said he was checking the camera mounts after a report of vibration from the maintenance crew. The camera mounts near Delta 7. At 730 this morning. 12 hours before the attack. Elena said, "Captain, I need base access to go suspended for Calloway immediately. Photo distributed to all gates and the surrounding area. And I need someone to run his vehicle registration. If it's still in the parking structure, he hasn't gone far. If it's gone." Vance was already talking to Reeves. Reeves was on the radio. Elena picked up her jacket. "Where are you going?" Vance said. "The parking structure. We have personnel who can—" "He knew I was here," Elena said. "He was watching the gate when I came in. He saw the checkpoint stop. He saw the incident." She zipped her jacket. "He doesn't know what I found, and he doesn't know what I know yet, which means he's either already gone or he's somewhere close waiting to find out how much damage the operation did before he decides where to run." She looked at Vance. "If he's still here, I want to talk to him before he's surrounded by response teams and lawyers up." Vance looked at her for a long moment. "You have 20 minutes, she said. "Then I'm sending backup whether you want it or not." Elena was already moving. The parking structure at Harbor Point was 4 levels, built in the utilitarian style of all base parking structures, concrete, open-sided, fluorescent lighting that turned everything slightly green. B level was where the exit ramp footage had been taken. She started there. It was 21:34. The structure had a cold stillness to it. At this hour, a handful of vehicles belonging to personnel on night watch, the hum of the lights, the distant sound of the water. Her boots made sounds on the concrete that she regulated carefully. Not silent, she wasn't trying to sneak, because the structure's acoustics made silent movement nearly impossible, and trying just made you slower. She moved at the pace that made the least sound consistent with covering ground, and she listened to the space around her. 3rd row from the west wall, a dark sedan Calloway's vehicle. She confirmed it against the registration Reeves had sent to her phone. Still here. Driver's side was closest to the wall. She approached it from the passenger side, keeping the vehicle between herself and the open eastern face of the structure. The sedan was empty. She crouched and looked under it, checked the spaces between vehicles, stood back up. She'd been in the structure for 6 minutes. She moved toward the stairwell. The stairwell door was slightly ajar, not broken, not forced, just not fully latched. The kind of thing that happens when someone pulls a door mostly shut in a hurry and doesn't wait for the mechanism to catch. Elena stood at the edge of the door for 3 seconds. Then she pushed it open with her foot, weapon up, and cleared the visible angles. Empty landing. Stairs going up, stairs going down. The smell of concrete and the cold that settles into stairwells when the building around them has been heated. From below 1 level down, ground floor, she heard breathing. Controlled, deliberate. The breathing of someone who had heard her moving and was doing the same calculation she was doing. Calloway, she said. Her voice went down the stairs, clearly. No echo distortion. The stairwell was small enough to carry sound cleanly. I know you're there. I know who you are. I know what you did. A pause. I also know you didn't shoot anyone today. That matters. Silence. Then how'd you find me? The voice was controlled. Flat, in the way of someone who had trained themselves not to give anything away in their voice, and was now using that training under conditions it hadn't been designed for. Shoulder seam on your jacket, Elena said. Footage from a parking structure in a man. 18 months ago. A long pause. That was a different operation, he said. I know. You're versatile. She moved two steps down, slowly, keeping the rail on her left and the wall on her right. Come up, and we talk before the response teams get here, which is going to be soon regardless. And if I don't, then you make a choice that is permanent in a way that talking to me isn't. She stopped on the third step. I'm not going to pretend I'm your best option, Calloway. But I'm a better option than what happens if you run and they catch you, or worse, if you do something that puts me in a position where I don't get to make the choice about how this ends. A very long pause. Footsteps on the lower landing. The door at the bottom of the stairwell opened. He came up. He was exactly the photograph medium height, late 40s, the jacket with the worn right shoulder seam. He looked tired. Not the way people look tired when they haven't slept, but the way they look tired when they've been performing a version of themselves for a very long time, and the performance has finally ended. He had his hands visible. No weapon. Hands stay where I can see them, Elena said. They're visible. Keep them that way. She was 4 steps above him. She kept the weapon at low ready, not pointed at him, but present, the geometry of it clear. He looked at it and then at her face. You're Cross, he said. Yes. They said you were coming. He said it without inflection. Not accusation information. 3 weeks ago, someone in the network said there was a possibility Cross would be deployed in connection with the Hale operation. We were told to accelerate the timeline, if that happened. Elena looked at him. So today wasn't just about Hale, she said. Calloway was quiet for a moment. It was always about Hale, he said. But when the word came through that you were linked to the base visit, the order changed. Complete the primary objective and use the resulting chaos to identify and eliminate the secondary target. The secondary target. She kept her face still. Who gave that order? She said. He looked at her with something that might have been, in different circumstances, respect. You know, I'm not going to answer that in a stairwell. You'll answer it somewhere. Maybe, he said. Depends on what's being offered. That's not my department. Then get someone from your department who can make offers, Calloway said. He looked at the weapon at her, low ready. I came up the stairs, Commander. I could have gone down. There's a drainage access on the ground level that comes out 3 blocks north of the perimeter. He paused. I came up. Elena looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the name he hadn't given her. The person who had flagged her involvement 3 weeks ago, someone who knew she was coming, knew her name, knew enough about her operational history to treat her presence as a threat multiplier worth accelerating an assassination attempt over. That was a very short list of people. A very short, very alarming list. Don't move, she said. She keyed her radio with her left hand, weapon still present. Vance, I have Calloway. Stairwell C, B level, he's cooperative. I need a quiet extraction. Just you and Reeves, no response team. The radio crackled. Copy that. 2 minutes. Calloway looked at the concrete wall of the stairwell. They're going to want to know everything, he said. Yes, the network goes deeper than this base. He said it the way you say something you've been deciding whether to say. Hale was one piece. There are other pieces. I know, Elena said. He looked at her. How much do you know? Enough to know that today was supposed to send a message that didn't get sent. She held his gaze. And enough to know that the people who sent you are going to have a problem with that. Calloway exhaled. It was the exhale of someone setting something down. Yeah, he said. They're going to have a significant problem with that. The sound of footsteps in the corridor outside the stairwell. The door opened. Vance came through first, Reeves behind her. They looked at Calloway, then at Elena. Vance said, "Is he?" "He's cooperative," Elena said again. She lowered her weapon and stepped aside to let Vance and Reeves reach him. "He wants to talk. Make sure the conversation happens somewhere, without a lot of people in the hallway." Vance nodded. She produced flex cuffs and looked at Calloway. He put his hands behind his back without being asked. Reeves took him by the arm, and they moved toward the corridor. Elena watched them go. She stood in the stairwell alone for a moment, listening to the sound of the parking structure, the lights, the water, the distant bass, settling into its night routine. She thought about what Calloway had said. They said you were coming. Someone had known she was being deployed to Harbor Point. Someone with access to operational planning, at a level where her name would appear, which was not the base, which was not the security office, which was not any of the personnel she'd encountered today. That kind of information existed in exactly 2 places, and she had worked her entire career in one of them. She holstered her weapon, walked out of the stairwell. The parking structure was quiet around her. The cold concrete and the hum of the lights in Calloway's dark sedan sitting in row 3 with its engine, cold and its doors locked, and its whole ordinary surface completely intact, giving nothing away, looking like exactly what it was supposed to look like, which was the problem. She'd been so focused on what Calloway had done, the clone badge, the camera adjustment, the fence gap, that she'd been treating him as the source of the operation rather than what he actually was. An instrument. Instruments didn't plan. They didn't identify secondary targets 3 weeks in advance. They didn't accelerate timelines based on who was coming. She stood beside his car and thought about the list of people who had known she was coming to Harbor Point, and she ran through the names one by one, and at the end of the list, she stopped. Because there was one name on it that she had been not looking at. The way you don't look at something would require you to do something very difficult if you confirmed it. EDE. She looked at it now. She stood in the parking structure in the cold, and she looked at the name, and she thought about what it meant and what it would cost and what happened next. Then she took out her phone, not the encrypted application. Her personal phone, the one with a number that hadn't changed in 9 years, that only a small number of people had, that she used for the conversations that couldn't exist in any system. She dialed. It rang 4 times. A voice answered that she recognized. "I need to see you," she said, in person. Not a call, not a message. In person. She paused. "Something came up today that you need to hear from me directly." The voice asked something. Elena looked at the stairwell door. "It's about who knew I was coming," she said. "And I think you're going to want to sit down when I tell you." She hung up, walked back toward the operations center. Behind her, the parking structure sat dark and cold and full of ordinary cars that had been exactly where they were supposed to be all day, while everything around them came apart and put itself back together in a different shape. The security camera above the B-level exit ramp looked down at the empty row 3. Its coverage zone was exactly where it was supposed to be. Someone had fixed it while Calloway was in the stairwell. Small correction. 15 degrees. Nobody had asked them to. Elena had done it herself on the way in out of habit, because a gap in coverage was a gap in coverage regardless of who you were trying to catch. And old habits were the ones that kept you alive when the thinking part of your brain was occupied with something else. She pushed through the door and went back to work. The operations center felt different at 22:30. The elevated alert status had settled into something more manageable, still heightened, still tense, but the raw electric quality of the first hours had burned down into the steadier heat of sustained response. Duty personnel worked their stations with the focused quiet of people who understood that the emergency wasn't over, just reorganized. The map overlay on the central display still showed the breach points in red. Someone had added blue markers for Calloway's movements over the past 72 hours, reconstructed from badge logs and camera footage, and the guard testimony that was still being collected. It looked like a web when you stood back, far enough to see the whole thing. Back far enough. She had a cup of coffee that had gone cold while she was in the parking structure, and she hadn't replaced it yet, just carried it from room to room the way you carry something you've forgotten you're holding. She was looking at the blue markers and thinking about timelines, not the timeline of today, which she understood clearly enough, but the longer timeline underneath it. The 14 months of shell company construction, the vendor presentation, the cloned badge, the camera adjustment, the rehearsed perimeter walks every Tuesday morning that gave Calloway legitimate cover for studying every inch of the east fence. Someone had been patient. Someone had planned this, the way you plan something when you expect to need it to work. She was still looking at it when the door opened and Admiral Hale came in. He wasn't in uniform. He'd changed into a gray sweater and dark pants, which somehow made him look more formidable rather than less. Without the uniform structure, he just looked like himself, which turned out to be a man who had survived 32 years of naval service and knew exactly what kind of room he was walking into. He looked at the map, then at Elena. "Captain Vance tells me you have Calloway talking," he said. "Preliminary? He's cooperative, but he's not giving up the network structure until he knows what's on the table." Elena set her cold coffee down on the nearest flat surface. "He'll need a prosecutor and a deal framework before he goes further. That's not my lane." "No." Hale looked at the blue markers. "But the immediate question is, yes." He came to stand beside her at the display. He looked at the web of markers for a moment. "You called someone tonight," he said. "From the parking structure. Personal phone." Elena looked at him. "I'm the Admiral of this installation, and 3 men tried to kill me today," he said, without heat. "My aide monitors communication traffic on base as a matter of protocol. I'm not apologizing for it. I'm not asking you to." "Who did you call?" Elena looked back at the map. "Someone I need to speak to in person," she said. "Someone whose name I'm not going to put into this room until I've had that conversation." Hale was quiet for a moment. "Does this person have a connection to today's operation?" "I don't know yet," Elena said. "I have a concern that requires verification before it becomes an allegation." "That's a careful answer. It's an honest one." Hale looked at her profile for a moment. She could feel it, the assessment, the weighing. He'd been reading people across tables and across decks for 3 decades, and she knew he was reading her now, looking for the thing underneath the careful answer. "Calloway said they knew you were coming," Hale said. "Yes. And you're telling me that the person who knew your deployment to this base was connected to whoever planned this?" "I'm telling you, it's a possibility I'm not willing to dismiss." "Who controls your deployment orders, Commander?" Elena said nothing. Hale looked at the map again. "Your command," he said. "Divi Gru, or above it." She still said nothing, which was itself an answer. Hale put both hands on the edge of the display table and looked at the web of blue markers, all the careful, patient work of 14 months compressed into a picture on a screen. "I've been in the Navy for 32 years, he said. "I've seen a lot of things that were supposed to be impossible. I've sat across from people who'd done things that couldn't be explained by any reasonable reading of their character or their record." He paused. "I've learned not to be surprised by what people will do when they believe the cause is sufficient." Another pause. "I haven't learned not to be angry about it." "No," Elena said. "That one doesn't go away." They stood there for a moment in something that wasn't quite silence. The operations center had too much background for silence, but there was a specific quality to the space between them that contained more than the noise around it. "What do you need from me?" Hale said. 24 hours before this goes to a formal interagency process," Elena said. "I need to have one conversation first. And if that conversation confirms what you're concerned about, then whoever I'm concerned about loses the ability to interfere with what comes next." Hale looked at her. You're asking me to sit on an active security investigation for 24 hours based on a concern you won't name. Yes, you understand why that's a difficult request. I understand exactly why it's difficult, Elena said. And I'm asking anyway. A long pause. 12 hours, Hale said. Not 24. 12. After that, it goes through official channels, regardless of where your conversation is. He straightened. And I want Vance in the loop on whatever you find. Not after the fact. As it happens. Agreed. He started to move toward the door. Stopped. Your file, he said. I had Reeves pull the unclassified portions tonight. Elena waited. The Silver Star, the Navy Cross, the Purple Hearts. He paused at each one, like he was reading them off a list he'd memorized, rather than just looked at. The MOH citation is classified, but the action date isn't. He looked at her. That was 4 years ago. You were 29. Yes, sir. You've been doing this since you were 22. Approximately. He looked at her for a moment with an expression that was not pity, something more complicated than that, more considered. How long are you planning to keep doing it? He said. Elena picked up her cold coffee. Until something more important comes along, she said. Hale held her gaze for another second, then nodded once and walked out. Mercer was in the hallway. He was sitting in one of the chairs against the wall, the kind of institutional chairs that exist in government buildings, specifically to make waiting uncomfortable. His jacket was off. He had his written statement in one hand, complete, everything he'd been told to document, and he was holding it the way people hold things they're not sure what to do with. He looked up when Elena came out of the operations center. She almost kept walking. She didn't. She stopped and looked at him. He looked back at her. Neither of them said anything for a moment. You turned in the statement? Elena asked. Handed it to Captain Vance an hour ago. He looked at the document in his hand. This is my copy, how detailed. Every word. He looked up. Like the Admiral said, nothing left out. Elena leaned against the wall opposite him. The hallway was quiet at this hour, just the distant sound of the operations center and the ventilation system and their own voices. What happens to you, she said. Not unkindly. Formal review. Probably reassignment. Mercer folded the statement along an existing crease. Unfolded it. Vance said something about the training division. That could be useful work. Or it could be where they put people they don't know what else to do with. Both things can be true, Elena said. Mercer looked at the statement. I keep reading this back and thinking about what I actually saw, he said. When you drove up. What I actually saw versus what I decided. He was quiet for a moment. It's not that I didn't see the right things. I saw them. The way you moved, the way you handled the ID, the way you were looking at the perimeter while I was talking. He paused. I saw all of it. I just ran it through the wrong. He stopped. The wrong filter. Elena was quiet. My commanding officer when I was new, she said. He told me once that the most dangerous thing in any security environment isn't the threat you can see. It's the assumption you're carrying that makes you blind to the threat you can't. She looked at the wall across from them. I've been carrying assumptions myself tonight. Just different ones. Mercer looked at her. What do you mean? She shook her head slightly. Not your problem. I'm just saying you're not the only one who looked at something today and let the filter run ahead of the information. He was quiet for a moment, absorbing that. The training division, he said finally. If that's where I end up, what would you teach? If you were me, what's the thing you'd want people to walk out of a room knowing? Elena thought about it, really thought about it, not the quick institutional answer that would have been easy to produce. That there's a version of competence that looks nothing like what you expect competence to look like, she said. And the gap between what you expect and what's actually there, that gap is the vulnerability. Not the fence, not the camera. The gap between expectation and reality, and whoever knows how to use it against you. She pushed off the wall. Teach them to close that gap. She walked down the corridor. Behind her, Mercer sat with his statement. And the hallway's fluorescent and something that might eventually, given enough time, become the beginning of a different kind of understanding. At 6:15 the following morning, a black SUV pulled into the visitor lot at Harbor Point Naval Station. Elena was already at the checkpoint when it arrived. She'd been up since 4:00, working through Calloway's preliminary statements with Vance and a JAG officer who'd been called in from the regional command and arrived, looking like someone who'd dressed in a vehicle. The statements were partial and strategic. Calloway gave enough to demonstrate his willingness to cooperate without surrendering anything that couldn't be walked back if the deal structure disappointed him. He was smart about it. He'd clearly thought about this moment before it arrived. But he'd given her one thing she hadn't asked for directly: a location, not a name. Location, a specific address in a residential area 40 minutes from the base, described as a secondary coordination point for the operation. Somewhere between a safe house and a message drop. The way these things usually were, nothing dramatic. Just a house that was rented under a name that would take time to unravel. Where physical materials were kept because digital communications left trails that physical ones didn't. She'd passed to Vance at 5:30 with a recommendation for a quiet approach rather than a hard entry. Whatever was in that house was more valuable intact than it was destroyed. Vance had agreed and made the call. Now Elena stood at the visitor lot and watched the black SUV and thought about the phone call she'd made from the parking structure and the person who was about to get out of that vehicle. The door opened. Rear Admiral James Whitfield stepped out. He was in his early 60s, tall, silver-haired in the way that photographs well and projects authority in rooms where authority is currency. He had the kind of face that had been handsome 20 years ago and had aged into something more interesting, deeply lined, with eyes that processed information visibly, which was either transparency or a performance of transparency. And Elena had spent 11 years trying to determine which. He had been her commanding officer for 4 of those, 11 years. He was currently the director of Naval Special Programs, the office that controlled her deployments, her operational orders, her personnel file, and the very small number of people who knew what her actual assignment history looked like. He was on the list of people who had known she was coming to Harbor Point. He looked at her across the parking lot. She looked back. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then he walked toward her, and she fell into step beside him, and they walked away from the visitor lot toward the walking path that ran along the waterfront section of the base, away from buildings, away from cameras, away from the institutional architecture of what both of them knew this conversation was going to be. The waterfront path was empty at this hour. Gray light over the Chesapeake, cold off the water. The kind of morning that hadn't decided yet what it wanted to be. They walked in silence for a minute. Whitfield said, "How bad is it?" "Depends on what you're asking about. Start with the operation. 3 attackers detained, cooperative in varying degrees. 1 internal asset in custody, preliminary statements given." She kept her eyes on the path. The network is larger than this installation. Calloway indicated multiple active nodes. He'll give them up in exchange for consideration, but that process takes time and oversight I'm not positioned to provide. The Admiral? Unharmed. Secure, and you? Also unharmed. Whitfield glanced at her. "That's not what I'm asking." Elena was quiet for a step or two. "I know who knew I was being deployed here," she said. "The list is short. I've gone through it." She kept walking. "There are 4 people with the clearance level and the access to my operational tasking orders who could have passed that information. 2 of them are career administrators who don't have a profile that fits the methodology of this network. One of them I've known for 12 years and I'd stake my life on." She paused. "And then there's you." Whitfield kept walking. His pace didn't change. His expression didn't change. "You called me last night," he said. "Yes. To tell me this in person, before you took it anywhere official." "Yes." "Why?" Elena stopped walking. Whitfield stopped 2 steps later and turned to face her. Because if I'm wrong, she said, and I take this through official channels first, it ends a career that doesn't deserve to end. It ends that doesn't deserve to end and contaminates an investigation that needs to be clean. And because she stopped. Because you trained me. Because you're the one who told me that the most important thing in any intelligence environment is holding the line between what you know and what you believe, between evidence and inference. She looked at him. I'm giving you the same standard. Something moved through Whitfield's expression. Not guilt, not relief. Something more complicated. The look of a man confronting the fact that he has been treated with more fairness than the situation required. What would you need from me? He said. To be certain. Tell me where you were on the night of the 14th, Elena said. 14 months ago, when Meridian Systems Integration was incorporated. Whitfield looked at her steadily. In Singapore, Naval Attaché meeting. There's a full travel log. I know. I checked it before I called you. She paused. I also checked the communication logs for your office over the past 3 weeks. There's a pattern of encrypted outbound traffic that doesn't match normal operational tempo. 6 instances. Small, short duration. Not flagged by automated monitoring because each one was below the threshold individually. Whitfield's jaw moved. That's my office communication system, he said. Not my direct terminal. I know. You're telling me someone used my office infrastructure. I'm telling you the traffic originated from your office infrastructure, which either means you sent it or someone with access to your office sent it. Whitfield looked out at the water. His hands at his sides were very still. My aide, he said. Not a question. Not quite. The tone of someone arriving somewhere they'd been approaching for a while without knowing it. Lieutenant Commander Tesh, Elena watched him. He handles the communication routing, Whitfield said. Classified traffic, scheduling, coordination. He has independent access to the encryption system. Because 3 years ago, I had a medical situation, and he needed to maintain operational continuity while I was... He stopped. He looked at the water. I never revoked the independent access. When did you first flag that Tesh might be? I haven't, Whitfield said. His voice was different, now tighter. Something working hard underneath the surface. I'm doing it right now, standing on this path, because you're telling me something that makes the last 6 months make a different kind of sense. He turned back to her. 3 months ago, I noticed a pattern in how certain operational information was moving through my office, things arriving at my desk slightly later than they should, with small inconsistencies in the routing metadata. I thought it was a system issue. I had a IT look at it. They found nothing. A pause. Because they were looking at the system. Not at who was using the system. Elena said nothing. Tesh has been with me for 3 years, Whitfield said. He's cleared at the highest levels. He's been present for. He stopped. He looked like someone doing inventory of a room and finding things missing that had been there so long they'd become invisible. He's been present for every significant operational briefing I've conducted. The water moved against the base of the seawall below the path. Is he in your office now? Elena said. He'd be arriving at approximately 7:30. Elena looked at her watch. 6:38. Call Vance, she said. Now, tell her about Tesh and give her everything you just told me. The communication logs, the access, the routing metadata. She paused. Don't call your office first. Don't send a message through any system he has access to. Whitfield looked at her. You're asking me to report against my own aide based on 14 months of documented network activity, a cloned access credential, an assassination attempt, and encrypted traffic originating from your office that correlates precisely with the operational timeline of everything that happened yesterday, Elena said. Her voice wasn't hard. It was just exact. I'm not asking you to convict him. I'm asking you to make a phone call to Captain Vance. A long pause. The morning sat cold and gray around them. Whitfield reached into his jacket and took out his phone. He looked at it for a moment. Then he dialed. By 8:00, Lieutenant Commander Derek Tesh had been identified, located at his off-base residence, and taken into custody by a joint team operating under a warrant that Vance had moved through the duty judge advocate with a speed that suggested she'd been preparing for something like this since the previous evening. Elena wasn't there for the arrest. She was in the operations center, watching the blue marker web on the display, when Reeves came in and told her. She nodded. She looked at the web. Then she looked at the address. Calloway had given her the secondary coordination point 40 minutes from the base. The quiet entry team Vance had sent at 5:30 had reported back at 7:20. The house was unoccupied, but not empty. Documents. Physical communication materials. A timeline chart that covered an 18-month period. Photographs. Photographs of Admiral Hale, his daily movement patterns, his vehicle, his security detail configurations, and 3 photographs of Elena. 2 were surveillance shots, a parking lot in Washington, a hotel lobby, in a city she recognized from 8 months ago. The third was a personnel photograph lifted from a classified file that had no business being in a rented house in a civilian neighborhood 40 minutes from a naval base. Someone had been building a package on her for a long time. Not just to plan around her, to plan against her. She stood at the display and held that thought. Reeves came to stand beside her. He looked at the web of markers. He looked at her face. "You okay?" he said. It was a simple question. It deserved an honest answer. "I've had better Tuesdays," she said. Reeves almost smiled, caught himself. "The Admiral wants to see you," he said. "When you're ready. No rush." Elena looked at the 3 photographs on the evidence list on her screen. The parking lot, the hotel lobby, the personnel file image. She thought about what it meant that someone had been tracking her movements for 8 months. She thought about all the times she'd assessed a space for threats and come up clean. She thought about the particular unsettling quality of finding out that you'd been watched from a distance, by people you hadn't found. She was human enough to find it rattling. She was experienced enough not to let it stop her. "Tell him I'll be there in 10 minutes, she said. She went to the small bathroom down the corridor, ran cold water over her face, and the back of her neck, looked at herself in the mirror for about 15 seconds without thinking about anything in particular. Then she dried her hands and went to see the Admiral. Hale's temporary office was a borrowed space someone's regular office vacated for the duration, with the usual evidence of the previous occupant still present in the form of family photographs and a coffee mug from a university Elena didn't recognize. Hale sat behind the desk, looking like a man who had slept about 3 hours and was running on something more fundamental than caffeine. He looked up when she came in. "Sit down," he said. She sat. "Tesh," he said. "Yes, sir. He's been in Whitfield's office for 3 years. "Yes, which means potentially 3 years of exposure at the highest operational levels." "That's the working assumption," Elena said. "The scope of what he may have accessed is going to take time to fully assess. That's a different investigation than this one, and one with considerably more resources than I have. NSA and others." Hale looked at his hands on the desk. "I want to ask you something," he said, "and I want you to answer it as honestly as you would if this conversation didn't have any professional consequences." Elena waited. "You came here yesterday for a specific reason," Hale said. "You weren't here for a meeting. Vance told you about the camera gap, about the concerns she'd been developing about perimeter security. You came because someone asked you to look at this base." He looked at her. "Who asked you?" Elena looked at him. "You did," she said. "Indirectly, through channels that kept the request informal enough that it wouldn't generate official traffic." She paused. "You were concerned you'd noticed things, small things, individually ignorable. You wanted an outside set of eyes that wouldn't have a profile in the base communication system." She let that sit for a moment, which is why they accelerated the timeline when they found out I was coming. Because an informal assessment doesn't generate the kind of documentation that announces itself. It's harder to track and harder to manage. Hale looked at her. I requested a security review, he said. I didn't specifically request you. No, Elena said. That routing happened at Whitfield's level, which is where Tesh intercepted it. She paused. The irony is that the informal request you made to avoid generating visible traffic became visible precisely because it crossed Tesh's desk. Hale sat back. He looked at the borrowed coffee mug. The family photographs of someone else's family. If the checkpoint stop hadn't delayed you, he said. If you'd made it to my office on schedule, I would have been inside the building when the truck came through, Elena said. And the three men would have had a different window. So Mercer's delay gave me 4.5 minutes at the gate where I could see the perimeter. She said it without editorializing. It was a mistake that produced a useful outcome. That doesn't make it less of a mistake. Hale was quiet. No, he said. It doesn't. He opened the folder on the desk in front of him. Elena recognized it, the familiar format of a service record printout, the unclassified portions, the one Reeves had pulled for him last night. He turned it around and pushed it across the desk toward her. She looked at it. Her own face in the official photograph. Younger. Before the third deployment, before Kandahar, before the operation, whose citation was still classified, and whose date was not. I've been doing this a long time, Hale said. I know what a service record looks like when someone has been genuinely tested. The real ones have a texture to them. The entries don't line up too neatly. The gaps mean something. He tapped the folder. This is one of the most textured records I've seen. Elena looked at the folder. I also know, Hale continued, that the people who carry records like this don't carry them lightly. That they cost something. That the person sitting across from me has paid a price I can read in the document, but not fully understand from the outside. She didn't say anything. I am formally recommending, Hale said, that your role in the events of yesterday be recognized at the appropriate level, through the appropriate channels, with the classification level that accurately reflects what actually occurred. That's not necessary, Admiral. It's not about necessity. His voice was even. It's about accuracy. The record should reflect what happened. He paused. You came through that gate, and you were treated as if you didn't belong here, and you protected this command anyway. That should be in the record. Elena looked at her own photograph for a moment. She thought about what she'd said to Mercer in the hallway, that she'd been carrying assumptions herself. She thought about the name she'd looked at in the parking structure and the phone call she'd made and the conversation at the waterfront path in the gray morning light. She thought about how close it had all been. Not the attack she'd had that in hand, from the moment the three men came through the fence. The other thing, the thing underneath it, the network that had been patient for 14 months and had almost had enough time to complete its work. One more thing, Hale said. He pulled a single sheet from the folder and slid it across. This arrived in my office this morning. From Whitfield. Before we knew about Tesh, before any of this morning's events. He paused. He submitted it last night. Elena looked at the sheet. A formal operational commendation. Whitfield's signature. Whitfield's office. Time-stamped 23:47, just over an hour after their phone call from the parking structure. She read it. She set it back down. He's trying to protect me, she said. Not with warmth, not with cynicism, just observationally. Possibly, Hale said, or he's trying to do the right thing while he still has the standing to do it. He looked at her. Those aren't mutually exclusive. Elena picked up the sheet and read it again. Then she put it back in the folder. She looked at Hale. The 12 hours you gave me, she said. How do you want to account for them in the official timeline? Hale looked at her steadily. What 12 hours? He said. Elena held his gaze for a moment. Then she stood, closed the folder, and slid it back across the desk. Thank you, Admiral, she said. She walked to the door. Commander Cross. She stopped. Whatever you carry out of this installation, he said, carries with it the understanding that this command knows what you did here, even when the record can't say it plainly. He paused. That matters. Elena looked at the doorframe. at the worn paint at shoulder height, scuffed by years of people moving through it without noticing. "Yes, sir," she said. "It does." She walked out. The corridor stretched ahead of her, fluorescent and institutional and entirely ordinary, and she moved through it with the same quality of motion she'd had at the checkpoint gate 17 hours ago, deliberate, aware, leaving nothing unread in the space around her. Behind her in the borrowed office, Admiral Hale sat with the folder and the coffee mug that wasn't his and the family photographs of people he didn't know, and he looked at the place where she'd been sitting. Then he opened the folder one more time, looked at the service record. At all that texture, he closed it, picked up his phone, made a call of his own. The corridor didn't change when she walked out of it. That was the thing about institutions. They absorbed extraordinary events and gave nothing back. The same fluorescent light, the same scuffed paint at shoulder height, the same ventilation hum that had been running since before anyone currently on this base had arrived and would continue running after they all left. Elena walked through it and it felt the specific flatness that follows sustained high functioning, not exhaustion exactly. More like the moment after a long hold when the muscles release and you feel briefly the full weight of what you were carrying. She needed sleep. She needed about 14 hours of it. She was going to get approximately none. Her phone buzzed at 8:34, a message from the contact she'd tasked the previous night, the one with no name in her directory, just the letter string. The message was a file attachment. She opened it in the encrypted application and read it standing in the corridor outside Hale's borrowed office, her back to the wall, one eye on the space around her. Out of habit, she no longer bothered trying to stop. The file was Tesh's background. All of it. The real version, not the personnel record. She read it through once, quickly. Then she started from the beginning and read it more slowly. By the time she finished, she understood 3 things with the particular clarity that comes from information falling into a pattern that had been assembling itself for months without her quite seeing the shape. First, Tesh had been recruited not 3 years ago when he joined Whitfield's office, but 7 years ago, before his first naval assignment, by a network that operated across multiple intelligence communities and had been patient enough to spend years placing assets in positions of value before activating them. Second, the network had a name, or at least a designation, used internally 2 words that appeared in several of the physical documents recovered from the coordination house, always in the same handwriting, always in the same position on the page, which suggested a specific individual rather than a collective. Third, 3 of the photographs taken from that house had been printed from a source file that still contained metadata. The source file had been accessed from a terminal. The terminal had an IP address. The address resolved to a location. Not in Virginia, not in Washington, overseas. She forwarded the file to Vance with a single line of text, the metadata on the photographs. Run the IP. Don't put it in any system connected to Whitfield's office infrastructure until Tesh's access has been fully revoked and audited. Then she put her phone in her pocket and went to find coffee that was actually hot. The operations center ran on a different rhythm in the morning. Day watch had rotated in at 7:00 fresh personnel, replacing the people who'd been running on adrenaline and bad coffee since the previous afternoon. The new faces looked at the red and blue markers on the display with the attentiveness of people who had been fully briefed on what they were looking at, but hadn't lived through the hours that produced it. There was a particular quality to their alertness, careful, focused, slightly over-calibrated, that would normalize within a few days once the installation settled back toward its baseline. Garza was still there. He'd been on watch since the previous afternoon and had declined to go off shift when his rotation came up. He was sitting at his workstation with the hollowed-out focus of someone running on their second wind, cross-referencing badge access logs against a master personnel list that had grown considerably since the previous evening. He looked up when Elena came in. "Commander, the coffee in the back is fresh." Someone just made a real pot, not the Karoff stuff. You've been here all night, Elena said. Yes, ma'am. Go home, petty officer. Almost done with the cross-reference. Someone else can finish it. Garza looked at his screen, then at her. Did we get him, Tesh? He's in custody. Garza exhaled. It was a long, compressed exhale, the kind that carries more than one night's worth of tension. He was here for 2 days last month, Garza said. Did a system review with Park. I showed him around the camera management interface because Park asked me to. He looked at his hands on the keyboard. I thought it was routine. It was presented as routine, Elena said. That's the job. You didn't know, she said, and there's nothing in your behavior that a reasonable person with reasonable information would have questioned. She looked at him. Go home, get some sleep. Come back tomorrow and finish the cross-reference with a clear head. He looked at the screen one more time. Then he logged out, picked up his jacket, and left. Elena poured the fresh coffee into a mug someone had left on the counter. Ceramic Navy logo, slightly chipped at the rim. She held it with both hands and stood at the display and looked at the map of the base. Red markers at the south gate and the east fence. Blue markers tracing Calloway's movements. A single orange marker that had been added overnight at the camera management room, representing Tesh's reconstructed presence via the cloned badge. She looked at the web and thought about 14 months of patience. 7 years of deeper patience, if the file on Tesh was accurate. She thought about what that level of commitment meant, not about the people who'd planned it. She'd spent enough time in rooms thinking about people who planned things like this, and it was not a productive direction, but about what it said about the value of what they'd been trying to reach. Hale was not a random target. A 3-star flag officer with specific oversight responsibilities in a specific operational domain. His removal at a specific moment in a specific context would have created a specific gap in a specific chain of authority. She knew what that gap was. She'd been working around its edges for 4 months without fully seeing it until this morning. She set down the coffee mug, picked up her phone, dialed Vance. The IP address on the photographs, she said when Vance picked up. I need that run by someone outside the base network. Completely outside. Use personal channels if you have them. I have someone at the regional NSA office I trust, Vance said. Use them. And when you get the location, don't move on it through any channel that Tesh or anyone in Whitfield's office may have had access to. A pause. This is bigger than the base, Captain. The base was one piece. A silence on Vance's end. Then how much bigger? I don't know yet, Elena said. But I know that the people who planned this didn't plan it for Hale specifically. They planned it for what happens after Hale. And figuring out what that is, that's a longer conversation than I'm cleared to have on this installation. Another silence. Understood, Vance said. I'll run the IP through clean channels. Elena hung up. She stood at the display for a moment longer. Then she went to write her formal operational report, the one that went to her actual command, the one with the classification level that reflected what had actually happened rather than the administrative surface of it. She requisitioned a secure terminal from the duty officer, a young ensign who processed the request with wide-eyed efficiency and didn't ask any of the questions that were visibly working behind his eyes. She sat down and wrote. The report took 3 hours. She was precise. She was complete. She did not editorialize. She included everything she'd observed, everything she'd acted on, and everything she'd concluded, with the supporting evidence for each conclusion. She included the name that had appeared at the end of her analysis in the Parkyo structure previous night, not as an accusation, as an observation, documented with the specific information that produced it. She included the photographs. She included the IP address and the metadata. She included Calloway's statement about the secondary target. She included her own name as that target. She did not include the 12. Hours Hale had given her before the formal process began, because Hale had asked her a question and she had given him an honest answer. And the 12 hours existed in the space between a question and an answer, which was not the same as an official operational timeline. She submitted the report at 11:52. At 13:15, the formal after-action review convened in conference room B. It was not the small debrief of the previous afternoons. This was a full proceeding from the base command, the regional security office, JAG, and 2 people from an agency whose name did not appear on the sign-in sheet. Captain Vance chaired it. Admiral Hale was present. Whitfield was present via secure video from Washington, his face on the screen in the corner of the room, looking like a man who had slept less than anyone and showed it more than he would have preferred. Mercer was present. Elena had not expected that. She registered it when she came in and found her seat, and she did not let it show, but she registered it. The review ran for 4 hours. It was the kind of meeting that generated more documentation than conclusions, more process than resolution, which was the nature of formal institutional responses to events that had exceeded what the institution was prepared for. Vance ran it tightly. She had the kind of organizational intelligence that kept a 4-hour meeting from becoming 6 hours without anyone feeling managed. The timeline was reconstructed. The security failures were named without euphemism. The response actions were assessed. When it came to the checkpoint stop, Vance put the camera footage on the display. The room watched it. Elena watched the room. The footage was what it was 4.5 minutes of a security gate interaction that was wrong in ways that were obvious in retrospect and would have been obvious in real time to anyone without the particular filter that Mercer had been running. It didn't need explanation. It didn't need narration. The footage simply ran and the room sat with it. Mercer sat with it. His face was controlled. He was looking at the display, but she suspected he was not seeing it. He'd already seen it many times in his head in the hours since yesterday afternoon. He was sitting with it in the way of someone who had already done the hardest part of looking at themselves clearly. Maddox stopped and was now doing the formal institutional version, which was easier and harder at the same time. When the footage ended, Vance said, "Master at Arms First Class Mercer, you submitted a full written account. Do you have anything to add or amend?" Mercer said, "No, ma'am." "Is the written account accurate and complete?" "Yes, ma'am." Vance looked at him for a moment. "Your account," she said, "is one of the more honest self-assessments I've read in 20 years of after-action reviews." She said it without warmth and without coldness, just as information. "That's noted in the record." Mercer said nothing. Elena looked at the table. When it came to her own section, she gave her account in the same measured language as the report, chronological, precise, without drama. She answered the questions from the agency representatives with the same precision, and when one of them pushed on a particular operational detail that fell outside the base's classification level, she looked at him and said, "That's a different conversation with a different clearance requirement," in a tone that ended the line of enquiry without requiring anyone else to intervene. At the end of her account, one of the JAG-G officers, a lieutenant colonel named Birch, 50s, with the particular weariness of someone who spent his career cleaning up what other people's decisions produced, looked at her over his reading glasses. "Commander Cross, it's the assessment of this review that your actions at this installation yesterday prevented the assassination of a flag officer and the compromise of operational information at the highest levels." He paused. "That assessment is going into the formal record." "Thank you, Colonel. Is there anything you want on the record regarding the circumstances of your arrival at the checkpoint?" Elena looked at him. She thought about what she wanted on the record. She thought about Mercer, 3 seats down, looking at the table. "The checkpoint functioned," she said, "imperfectly. The security gap was exploited. Those failures are documented." She paused. "The person running that checkpoint has submitted an accurate and complete account of what happened and why. which is more than most people manage under equivalent circumstances. That's also something I'd like on the record. Birch looked at her over his glasses for a moment. He wrote something down. Mercer was looking at her. She didn't look back. She was looking at Birch, but she could feel it, the particular quality of someone looking at you when they don't know whether to say something and the moment is passing. She let it pass. Some things didn't need to be witnessed to be real. The review concluded at 17:20. People move through the aftermath the way they always do, small conversations in doorways, the exchange of contact information, the particular business-like warmth of people who have been through something difficult together and are now separating back into their individual institutional lives. Whitfield's screen had gone dark at 17:15. He'd signed off with the brevity of a man who had a great deal of his own aftermath waiting for him in Washington, the audit of his office, the revocation of Tesh's access architecture, the review of every operational matter that had crossed his desk in the 3 years of Tesh's tenure. It would take months, it would be thorough and unpleasant, and conducted by people whose job was to assume the worst until proven otherwise. He had, before the screen went dark, looked directly at the camera for a moment, not at the room, at Elena specifically, though the video framing made it ambiguous. He said, "Commander Cross." She said, "Admiral Whitfield." "Good work," he said. "Not thank you." "Not I'm sorry." Those were conversations for a different context, if they happened at all. Good work. It was the most honest thing he could offer in a room with 16 other people and 4 agencies and a recording running, and she accepted it for what it was. The screen went dark. She found Mercer outside. Not deliberately, she was walking toward the visitor lot to retrieve her sedan, which had been moved during the lockdown, and return to an approximation of its original position, and he was standing near the flagpole at the edge of the administrative building's entrance. Jacket on, not quite leaving and not quite staying. He looked at her when she came down the steps. She stopped. The afternoon had gone cold properly. Now a front had come through while they were inside, and the air had a different quality to it, the specific sharpness that comes with dropping pressure and clearing skies. "Where do you go now?" Mercer asked. It was a simple question. She didn't know if he meant tonight or generally, and she gave him the answer that covered both. "Wherever they need me," she said. He nodded, looked at the flagpole. The flag was moving in the cold wind, pulling against the line with a sound like something impatient. "I've been thinking about what you said," he said, "in the hallway last night, about the gap between expectation and reality. Yes, I've been carrying that filter for 6 years," he said. "Maybe longer. I didn't know it was a filter. I thought it was experience. Pattern recognition." He paused. "I thought I was good at reading people." "You were reading patterns," Elena said. "That's not the same thing." "Yeah." He was quiet for a moment. "What's the difference?" Elena looked at the flag. "Patterns tell you what usually happens," she said. "People tell you what's actually happening right now." She paused. "The work is learning to read both at the same time without letting one cancel out the other." Mercer considered that. "That's what you were doing at the checkpoint," he said. "Reading both." "Trying to." She looked at him. "I've been doing this for 11 years, and I still get it wrong sometimes. I told you yesterday I was carrying my own filter last night, about someone I've worked with for a long time." She paused. "The filter is never fully gone. You just learn to catch it faster." Mercer looked at the flag for another moment. "The training division," he said. "Vance confirmed it this morning. Official reassignment, effective in 2 weeks. How do you feel about it?" He thought about it honestly, which she could see him doing, not reaching for the answer that would sound right, actually sitting with the question. "Like I deserved something worse," he said. "And like maybe the point is to do something useful with the second chance, rather than argue about whether I deserved it." Elena looked at him. "That's about the best answer you could give," she said. She started walking, Commander. She stopped. Turned halfway. The jacket, Mercer said. I know what it is now. What it means. He paused. I'm sorry I asked you to take it off. Elena looked at him for a moment. The cold wind moved through the space between them. Learn from it, she said. That's what it's worth. She walked to her car. The sedan was where they'd left it, moved 10 feet from its original position, rear facing slightly east, the cracked brake light exactly as it had been at 14:22 the previous afternoon. She sat in her seat for a moment without starting the engine. The lot was quiet. Most of the response vehicles had cleared out over the past several hours. The food truck was gone. The maintenance crew's equipment had been packed up at some point, the orange vests folded and the paint buckets sealed. The lane markings half finished and left that way, because the lockdown had interrupted the job and nobody had gotten back to it yet. Half-finished lane markings, a cracked brake light. She started the engine. Her phone buzzed. Vance. A text message. 4 words. EP resolved. Good lead. Elena read it. Set the phone on the passenger seat. Put the sedan in gear. The gate arm lifted when she approached. Her credentials had been logged. Her departure authorized. All the administrative apparatus of the installation doing its job correctly, the way it did 10,000 times a day without incident. The guard at the booth, not Mercer, a different face nodded as she passed. She drove out. The road beyond the gate was ordinary in every way. Traffic, stoplights, the particular late afternoon light of a coastal autumn day, low and flat and orange-edged. She merged onto the main road and drove. She thought about the IP address resolving to an overseas location. She thought about the designation in the handwriting from the coordination house documents. 2 words. Always the same position on the page. She thought about the next operation, whatever it was, wherever it took her, which was not a thought she was used to having so close to the end of one thing. Usually there was a rest, a decompression, a period of days or weeks where she existed in the specific nowhere of between, not deployed, not at rest, just suspended in the administrative pause that her command called recovery time, and that she'd always used for something practical. She didn't think there was going to be a pause this time. Something larger than Harbor Point was moving. She could feel it the way you feel weather coming, before the sky changes, not as data, as pressure. The accumulated weight of 14 months of patience and a network spread across multiple communities, and a designation written in consistent handwriting by someone who had been doing this long enough to be consistent. She drove. At a red light 3 miles from the base, a young woman in the car beside her was wrestling with a flat tire in the breakdown lane. She'd pulled mostly off the road, hazards blinking, kneeling beside the rear wheel with the body language of someone who had found the spare tire and the jack and the lug wrench, and had hit the limit of their familiarity with the process. Elena looked at the light, looked at the woman with the flat. The light changed. She pulled forward, put on her own hazards, and stopped. She got out. Hey, she said, I've got this. The woman looked up. 22, maybe 23, with the specific expression of someone who had been trying to decide whether to call someone or figure it out and was exhausted by the decision. You sure? Yeah, Elena said. Give me 10 minutes. She took the lug wrench. No cameras, no audience. The late afternoon traffic moved past them without slowing everyone going somewhere, everyone inside their own momentum. Nobody looking at the shoulder of the road where a woman in an olive flight jacket was changing a tire for a stranger in the fading light. The work was simple and physical and entirely contained. Loosen, lift, pull, replace, tighten. 8 minutes, not 10. Her hands were dirty when she finished. The young woman tried to give her money, which she declined, and tried to give her name so she could pay her back somehow, which Elena also declined. Just pay attention to your tires before you need them, Elena said. Better to know before it's a problem. She got back in her sedan, merged back into traffic, her dirty hands on the steering wheel. The Chesapeake visible in flashes between the buildings and trees gray water, white caps, the far shore low and dark in the distance. She thought about Mercer and his half-written statement and the flagpole and learned from it. That's what it's worth. She thought about Hale and professionally, and his borrowed office, and the 12 hours he'd given her, which had made the difference between an investigation that stayed clean and one that got contaminated before it found its footing. She thought about Whitfield and the phone call at 23:47. The commendation he'd filed in the hour after she'd confronted him on a waterfront path in the gray morning, when he could just as easily have done nothing and waited to see how things developed. She thought about Calloway in a holding room somewhere, trading pieces of a network he'd spent years helping to build, and what it cost a person to make that choice, and whether it was enough. And the answer to that was above her pay grade, and always had been. She drove. The light changed again, and she went with it. 3 weeks later, Harbor Point Naval Station published a revised security protocol, 47 pages, restructured checkpoint procedures, redesigned camera coverage zones, new frameworks for threat identification that started from the assumption that danger had no consistent appearance and that the most important variable in any security environment was the gap between what personnel expected to see and what was actually there. Mercer wrote 6 pages of it. He'd been in the training division for 2.5 weeks at that point. He'd hated it for the first 4 days, the reduction in status, the administrative pace, the specific indignity of being moved sideways when he'd always moved forward. He'd done the work anyway, because work was what he knew and because there was a specific instruction that had stayed with him, word for word, from a corridor conversation at 100 on a night when he'd had nothing useful to say and a woman had said something useful to him instead. Teach them to close the gap. He was trying. The 6 pages he wrote were about recognition, specifically about what recognition required, which was not more information, but a different relationship to the information you already had. He wrote it in plain language because he wasn't a writer, and the plain language turned out to be exactly right for what he was trying to say. Vance read the draft and told him to expand it. He did. The full section ran 14 pages in the final protocol. Across the base, in small rooms and briefings and shift handovers, the new framework took root, the way things take root in institutions, slowly, imperfectly, with friction and backsliding, and the occasional argument about whether the old way was really so wrong. But the questions people started asking were different. The assumptions they flagged were different. The gap, incrementally, began to close. Elena Cross did not attend the protocol publication. She was not on the base. She had not on the base since the afternoon she drove out through the checkpoint with dirty hands and a cracked brake light and half-finished lane markings in her mirrors. Her file in the base administrative system listed her departure as routine. Her visit authorization expired on schedule. There was nothing in the system that reflected the 4.5 minutes at the checkpoint gate or the 3 men in the east lot or the parking structure stairwell or the waterfront path conversation in the gray morning. Nothing official. What was official was elsewhere, in files with classification levels that the Harbor Point administrative system couldn't see, updated with the precision that her report required, and the recognition that Admiral Hale had formally recommended, and that the relevant authorities had processed in the weeks following. The Medal of Honor citation remained classified. The Silver Star remained in the record. The Navy Cross remained in the record. The new entry, the one that reflected the events of Harbor Point, worded with the careful understatement of classified operational commendations that are designed to be readable only by people who already know what they're reading, was added on a Thursday afternoon by an administrator in a building in Washington, whose job was to make sure the record reflected what actually happened. It did. And somewhere in a vehicle on a road, approaching something new the way she always approached things, by reading the space before she entered it, Elena Cross carried it. Not on her jacket, in the record, in the only place that mattered. The checkpoint at Harbor Point Naval Station still smelled like motor oil and burnt coffee on Tuesday afternoons. But the guards asked different questions now, not just about what they saw, about what they might be missing. That was the real legacy of the woman who'd pulled up to the gate in a beat-up sedan with a cracked brake light and a faded jacket and handed over her ID and authorization, already clipped not the 5 seconds in the East lot, not the 3 men who couldn't walk straight for a week afterward, not the network that was still being unraveled in rooms she'd never enter. The legacy was a question, a single question that Mercer had put into 14 pages of security protocol, and that now lived in every briefing and every shift handover, and every moment when a guard looked at someone and started to decide what they were. Before the information was in, what are you missing because of what you expect? It was not a comfortable question. It was not supposed to be. Quiet competence doesn't announce itself, doesn't dress for the room, doesn't ask to be recognized before it does the work. It simply shows up in a worn jacket, in a beat-up car, on a Tuesday afternoon, and does what needs doing while everyone else is looking somewhere else. The world is full of people like that. The only question is whether you're paying enough attention to see them.